Welcome to this week's episode of the Brownie Points podcast. This week, we're going to start off with our big takeaways from this game, followed by key moments, the most influential segments of the game. Following that, we're going to have a Brownie Points segment, which is basically our little award show, which is where we give out Brownie Points to the standout players on offense and to the standout players on defense. And following that, we'll have a segment on our storyline of the week, which is how far can Joe Flacco take this team? And then we're going to round out the episode with our final segment previewing the Browns game versus the Jaguars next week. So getting into our big takeaway from this game, what are your thoughts after the Browns loss to the Rams?
My thoughts, well, I know a lot of people are going to focus on the offense, and that makes a lot of sense for sure. And that will definitely be covered. But my big takeaway is this defense may not be enough after all. And we have come to be very confident in this defense. But at the same time, when you look back on it, it does feel like we've had a bit of a fortuitous gamble on how the schedule's worked out. Doesn't mean the defense is suddenly trash or anything like that. But it might not be quite as dominant as we were hoping. Now, mind you, we are dealing with injuries, yes. But we might also continue to deal with injuries. Ward has had injury problems for a while. Like, this isn't new. So you can't necessarily rely on him being healthy. Now, Garrett has been healthy for the most part. So you do feel like he was dealing with an injury yesterday because he just was gone. Like, you could not tell he was even there. And usually he at least pops up for a little, and he was really a non-factor yesterday. Regarding Ward, him being out again, it feels like there's usually a corner out for the Browns. So honestly, the stretch we had where they were all healthy felt more of an anomaly than having somebody injured. And it's been bad back-to-back weeks now. That's scary. Like the Broncos ran all over us, and the Rams passed all over us. Now, what the Broncos particularly picked on MJ Emerson, and Puka Nacua just ripped him to shreds. Now, to be fair, Puka Nacua is actually really, really, really talented. And yeah, nobody saw that coming, but yes, he is really, really good, and we set several records, etc., etc. So having a guy like him of his talent against MJ Emerson, who's not really the best cover corner, was a big problem. Like, it clearly was a big mismatch. He was able to pick him apart. The problem is, when you get to these elite levels, you'll have a third receiver that can do that. You'll have different problems. You'll have someone who makes you adjust your defense, and then you don't have that same protection for those players who struggle. And with these last 2 weeks, it makes you wonder where the defense actually is. And the big takeaway is the jury's actually still out on this defense. We're not actually sure. Like, it seemed like we were sure, and now we're thinking maybe, maybe not. What will happen the next few weeks, especially next week facing the Jaguars, will be a big teller as to where this defense actually stands.
Yeah, I agree. Because at the beginning of the year, we talked about, is this defense good enough to where you basically only need a bridge quarterback, right? Can you do that format, or you just keep the game super, super close, like what the Steelers do now? Keep the game really tight and then try and win it at the end with bridge quarterback play. But the way the defense has been playing recently, I think we kind of shifted from that, and now the question is this, where is this defense, right? And we kind of have to reevaluate what it is. Certainly, their run defense has been slipping heavily. Their pass defense was actually still okay against the Broncos. They didn't give up that many passing yards, even though when you watched it, we did kind of get carved up a little bit on off. When they tried to pass, they were successful. But in overall yards, there wasn't that much, but we really have been starting to get gashed on the defensive line. I think that might be the most concerning thing, especially because the defensive back unit, you do have that Denzel Ward is out, and you know how good of a player he is and how much that affects things. Obviously, everyone has to slide up a role. So now Newsome is playing guys he wouldn't normally be guarding, and Emerson is guarding players he wouldn't normally be guarding. So everyone's kind of having to overplay their talent. So we'll see what happens if Denzel Ward could come back. But my big takeaway from the game is very similar: is where is this defense really now? Because we used to think a bridge quarterback play will do it, but now I'm not so sure. Now it looks like we're going to need a more competent offense to get that done. And I don't know that this defense is going to do that. We'll see. I think that Jim Schwartz is a fairly proven as a defensive mind, and I'd like to think that this is more of a blip and it's a result of injuries and change and things that have been happening with the team overall, and I'd like to think that they'll get back on track. But I think that we have to reevaluate a little bit and reconsider that maybe this isn't an elite defense. Maybe it's just a good defense. And maybe we got to take this more week to week. So that's kind of my big takeaway. from that game. On the flip side of things, right, the key moments from that game, what really swung it though, wasn't really the defense. I mean, the defense obviously wasn't great, gave up 33 points, but what really swung that game to me, the most important play, and I think it's pretty obvious though, really, is that pick that Joe Flacco threw at the end of the game. The Browns had a chance, they could have gone down, and we would have had a chance. Just absolutely launched that ball into next week. The receiver really didn't even have a chance at it. They picked it off. Obviously, we know the Rams come down, score, and it's basically game over. Technically, there was still a chance after, I think, but it was game over at that point. And it was really a shame because Joe Flacco had played decently up until that point, and it may be even pretty good. And we'll get into him specifically later, but that pick really just undid everything, I felt like. And it's a shame that the worst throw of the game, it came at the most crucial point of the game. But I don't know, I don't know if you had a different moment that you felt like was as impactful, but
I wouldn't say as, but I'd say there were several moments that were very impactful in terms of, I would say, the Puka Nacua touchdown pass of 75 yards. That was really, really, really impactful. That was, I mean, it was like, up to that point, the defense had mostly kept them in check. Like they hadn't done anything too crazy, and it felt like the game was settling in. And then boom, out of nowhere, they get that huge play, big touchdown. So I think that was a very big moment. I do think the missed extra point was a big moment. It really hurt the momentum of the team. I was like, okay, wait, we're not out of this. Tie the game. Nope, missed the extra point. And we'll say he's been good most of the year, but there have been a couple times in some bad moments where he's missed.
Why is he missing extra points?
It's just, and it's extra points. It's not field goals for the most part. It's extra points, which is just weird.
I think he's missed more extra points this year than 50-yard field goals.
Yeah, I think so. I have to.
Part of that's because you don't attempt that many 50-yard field goals, but he's attempted like 6 or 7 this year. And I think he missed one of them, and he's missed 2 extra points, I believe.
It's been strange. But yeah, and then of course there's that interception. Of course, you can't forget that interception. It was also very weird because up till that point, he had made really good decisions. And that was just like a weird decision. Like, I didn't feel like he just like made a bad throw. He just chucked it in a weird direction. I didn't know what was going on. It was just, that was mind-boggling. But then I would say the last play would be going for it on 4th down. And then missing it. That really ended the game. Now, I understand. I don't necessarily have a problem with going for it because the defense hadn't been stopping the Rams. But you had 3 timeouts, right? You could punt it and a 2-minute warning. You could punt it, use your timeouts plus a 2-minute warning. And if you get a 3 and out, you get time back and you can go and attempt this play. But instead, because it's a 1-possession game at that point, it's 8 points. But you're hoping you can get that and then you get your shot. And you can maybe like 1 timeout left because it's a 2-minute warning. You get 1 minute, maybe a minute 30 or so, minute 40 in a timeout to go down there and get your touchdown. So, but you would have to trust the defense. So I understand going for it. I'm not necessarily against it, but it's definitely a pivotal moment. And not getting it obviously was over because at that point they had time. They were right by the end zone. Like even a field goal makes it 2 possessions. They get the touchdown. It was over at that point. I do want to also highlight, even though in this game it did not end up mattering, the challenge call by Stefanski was terrible. And for the most part, he coached a good game today. Really good game, honestly. But that was so that made me question his sanity for a minute. That was one of the easiest calls. That catch was so easy. It was a no-brainer. Like, you throw that, like, I don't understand what you were even challenging. Like, it confuses me. It's one of the easiest calls you'll ever see on your TV. Just a play happening, that's one of the easiest calls you can make. There was no question. So I don't know why he would challenge it and then lose a timeout. And the guy went out of bounds. The clock was stopped. It didn't even, it's one thing if the clock didn't stop and you're like, well, I need to use a timeout anyway, so I'm going to take a shot at it. Fine. The clock was stopped. So that was terrible. It wasn't the most pivotal moment, but there are definitely games when losing a timeout over something stupid can be extremely pivotal. So that he does need to clean that up, even though it's not as pivotal in this game.
Yeah, I think that like that moment was like you said, like the decision in and of itself, in a vacuum, was horrible. In the context of the game, you can look past it because it didn't affect anything at all. But yeah, that's terrible. And like there are going to be games where giving up that timeout is going to make a pretty big difference, but we'll see. Hopefully, we haven't really seen a lot of terrible challenges from him, so I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But let's give it our awards for today. Let's do our brownie point segment. So for our first time listeners, which should be all of you, we're gonna give out our brownie points. And brownie points is like our little awards. So we give out 3 brownie points, 2 brownie points, and 1 brownie point. We give that to the on offense, and we give that to the standout players on defense. Sometimes everybody gets, not everybody, but sometimes we give out points for all of those levels. Sometimes nobody. It all depends on the week. So this week, it all depends on our discretion, basically. This week, when you're looking at the offense, who to you deserves brownie points?
On the offense, so I'm going to hand out 3 brownie points to Elijah Moore. And some people will, some people won't. But I thought he had a really good game. He grabbed over 80 yards. Best game of the season by far. He had some really big plays, some really important plays, plays when it mattered. I thought he really helped the offense a lot with some of those big plays. And honestly, he's put up over 180 yards in the last 3 games. So over 180 yards. Really doing a lot better since Watson has been out of the lineup, which is not the best feeling when you've paid that man that much money. But at least you can see that Moore does still have talent. It's not like he just disappeared. There's still talent there, and hopefully you can figure out something down the line to make use of him regardless of who's under center. But he was alive, and he was out there, and he was doing things in his 3rd game in a row where he's been a solid to good producer. This game, good. I thought he did really well. I think in every moment that he could, he made a big play. And so for those reasons, I'm going to give him 3 brownie points. Moving on to 2, I'm going to give it to Joe Flacco. And yes, he made a terrible mistake there at the end. But at the same time, he played much, much, much better than I expected. I was definitely wrong. Got to take that. And you never know. Next week, people may look at the tape and figure some things out and play him off a lot better. But he definitely didn't look like a 39-year-old, which I know he's a month short of, but more or less 39-year-old. He didn't look like that. He didn't look like what I thought he might look like a Cam Newton-esque, where he comes in and it is just awful. He wasn't. So I was definitely wrong about that. Got to eat it. He was pretty good. And for a lot of the game, he looked more comfortable than I've seen a quarterback look since 2020 in the Stefanski offense. Well, that's not completely fair, though he did look similar to Brissett at times. I think Brissett had some games also where he looked that comfortable. And it made me think about a type of quarterback that Stefanski wants might be more important than how overall talented somebody is. Honestly, it does make you wonder about the Watson trade because it makes you think that's just the wrong guy to work with Stefanski. Even if you want to move on, it feels like his skill set just doesn't really eke into what Stefanski wants to do, and so therefore you're kind of putting a square peg in a round hole. And it's just, you can do it enough where it works, but not the way it should, and you're not maximizing the talent that you have. And you see Flacco come out there, and he can read defenses. He's used to this kind of thing. He plays the pocket. He's been in the league a long time. He knows how to work out of the pocket, and he just looks so smooth and extremely comfortable in his decision making. And it was a stark contrast what we've seen for a little while, certainly over DTR, but even over Watson. So it was very different looking, and it was very interesting. He looked a lot better, and makes you think, it does make you wonder about some of these games, if the defense can get back to form a little bit, what that down the stretch can look like. So it was actually one of the more hopeful games, one of the better looking games for the offense in a long time, weirdly enough. And then 1 star, I'm actually going to give it to Harrison Bryant. We're at 5 for 49 yards and a touchdown. And he wasn't super explosive, but he was good. And it felt like it was really interesting. He had a quarterback who seemed to like to use the tight ends this game. We always heard about Stefanski, he loves tight ends, but I really have yet to think of even a single game where tight ends, plural, were both used at high amounts, and this was actually one of them. And Bryant actually was pretty good. And every moment he was there, he caught a big touchdown pass, and he made several big plays. So I thought Bryant was good and put in a good effort. So as far as offense is concerned, those are the brownie points I'm awarding today. What about you?
For me, not too different, but at 3 brownie points, I'm actually giving it to nobody. I don't think anybody really stood out to me enough to warrant 3 brownie points. That's typically what I think of. When I think of three brownie points, I think of that as a Pro Bowl level performance. That was a great performance. I don't think anybody had a great game. At 2 brownie points, I'm going to give it to Elijah Moore because Elijah Moore had a good game. I think he had 4 or 5 catches for about 80 yards. He had a good game. He was finally noticed. He actually got some attention from Joe Flacco. I don't know how much of that was just Joe Flacco utilizing what was on the field, or how much of that was the fact that they did have somewhat of a previous rapport when they played together on the Jets. Who knows? Either way, we're happy to see something out of Elijah Moore because we know he was more talented than the production that we were getting out of him. So it'd be nice if we could get something like this because Elijah Moore is the kind of player that you could get somewhere between 50 and 80 yards from him on a weekly basis. So that's really nice to see. At one brownie point, I have Joe Flacco. Now, to be fair, I do think Joe Flacco had a two brownie point level performance. We just don't give out 2 brownie points to 2 players. So I kind of had to split hairs a little bit, and I decided that Joe Flacco's pick was too much, and I bounced him down to 1. Overall, he looked pretty good. I also thought he was going to be a complete disaster. We talked about it pretty extensively about how bad of we thought he was going to be, and yeah, like we kind of got to eat it, at least from this game. And like you said, like, we'll have to see next week because it's not uncommon for backups, especially veterans and guys like that who know how to read a defense, to do well against more basic defenses because the defense doesn't have that film on you and they don't know exactly what you're going to try to do. So they often end up running simpler defenses against you, or they would just blitz a lot if you're younger usually. But they often will run simpler defenses, and a veteran quarterback might have an easier time breaking that down. So we'll see what happens next week because the Jaguars will be designing everything exactly to Joe Flacco. So we'll see what happens there. But for this week, he surprised me. I was wrong. I think he had 1 brownie point. Overall, it was a pretty good game. He had some really bad throws, but also a lot of good throws and anticipatory throws. And again, we'll get more into him specifically later, so I don't want to get too far, but that's how I felt about him there at 1 brownie point. Moving into the defense, who are your standouts on defense?
I did not have any at all. Really, this defense did not have any wars, to use a baseball term, wins above replacement. It's a stat that's used, for those who don't know, for a player based on how many wins above a replacement player. So if you had this person, average person, instead of this player, how many more wins would you have because you have this player? And it's a way to evaluate someone. Someone really good can save you a certain amount of games. And today, there was no wars. There was nobody. Like last week, like it was a bad performance, but JOK was really good, and like we all knew it. This week, nah. Our secondary got burned, and it wasn't like we really stuffed the run. The run wasn't going crazy, but they were passing the ball all over the place. But they ran the ball pretty well when they needed to. They got down in the red zone. They got right into the end zone. So it didn't really feel like there was any major stoppages there. Just kind of felt like they were more or less doing what they wanted to. There was a little period where we got some stops, but that's not enough. And it's not enough for me to give anything. Garrett kind of disappeared again, probably injury, but he disappeared, and Ward was out, and Emerson got picked apart. And while you would like to say Newsome held Kupp in check, that might just be because Puka Nacua was ripping us a new one, and there wasn't so much need to go to Cooper Kupp. So that's what I've got.
Yeah, I'm actually in agreement with you. I don't know, is this the first time that neither of us are giving out any brownie points on defense?
Yeah, that's the first time.
I think it is.
Defense, yes.
Yeah. Because the defense has usually been a standout. There's at least been one standout, at least. Outside of that brief stretch.
Two every time, usually.
Yeah, I think so. But there was that stretch where they got a few 3 and outs, and I was like, okay, they're settling in. They didn't. They ran against us when they wanted to run. They threw the ball against us when they wanted to throw. The defense didn't really do anything. There weren't any standouts. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. We have much more interesting things to get into than the defense's performance on that day, and we've already talked about them really extensively, kind of actually more than the segments would have made you think we would. But so yeah, no brownie points on defense for anybody on Levi or my part. So let's get into the more interesting topic. I think this is the big thing. This is what everybody, all of Brown's Twitter and all Brown's discussions, I think, are really talking about. Joe Flacco. How far can this team go with Joe Flacco as the quarterback? Because it looks like they're probably going to run with him to the end of the season, assuming he doesn't get injured. With the Browns' luck, he probably will get his head taken off next week. But assuming that doesn't happen, Joe Flacco is going to be our quarterback at the end of the season. How far can this team go with Joe Flacco?
Well, first of all, it's most likely he's going to be the quarterback, but you never know. The stubbornness of coaches can defy you. And some people really live by the credo, you can't lose your job to an injury. And so might put DTR back in the mix. I think that would be a huge mistake. I don't think he'll make that mistake, but it's possible. However, we shall see. PJ doesn't seem likely to really threaten for the starting job right now, and it does feel like they've decided that they don't want to start him unless they have to. And you kind of saw that also with the Jets yesterday. If you saw when Boyle went out, they went to Simeon, not back to Zach. They were like, now we're going to Trevor Simeon. Like, no, we're just done with you for now. So that's just kind of, I feel like, how they are with PJ. So they're going to go to Joe. It would certainly seem like Joe. Look, the way he played, it makes you think there's some limits, but he's still going to need the defense to hold up, so he doesn't need to keep making plays. You saw sooner or later there will be a crack. So if you expect him to put up 30 points, yeah, that's not realistic. But if you wanted to put up 22 to 25 and have a good defense, if the defense can show similar to what they were doing earlier in the year, then you're feeling good about this. You're thinking, hey, we got a shot to do a whole lot of things. I mean, it feels like they could go to the Super Bowl because, and I know that's like sounds like a big statement, but the NFC is weak until the top, and then the top they're very heavy. The AFC is not as heavy. I mean, the Chiefs just got beat last night by the Packers. We're not good. They've looked kind of weak all year, and not that they're terrible, but they're just not great. Their defense is pretty good, but not like spectacular, and their offense has been sputtering. It's been not great this year. Pretty good, but not great. And there's been moments, and they've had multiple games that they lost. And then you look at the Bills, and they've been all over the place, not been all that good. Dolphins are very good, but at the same time, it feels like a couple times you've seen them get punched in the mouth, and feel like a good defense can make them act very differently. They really run it up on bad teams, but other times it's been very different. When they've actually gotten punched, they stay down for a bit. So there's certainly no guarantees on that. The Ravens are tough, certainly, but we just beat them. So I'm not saying it'll be easy, but there's a chance. If you can get your defense together, there's a chance at something the Browns, maybe even a championship game. The Browns haven't been to a championship game since the 80s, so there's opportunity. Do I think it will happen? Not necessarily, but if the defense can get it together and Joe Flacco can play similar to what he was doing last week, look, he looked comfortable, and he can make plays, and there's talent on this offense. So the answer is, if I tell you, if the defense can get it together, then Joe Flacco could potentially take us to a championship game. We've seen him make runs before. That's the farthest he could go. More realistically, what I expect is a first-round exit in the playoffs. As a second wild card.
I mean, I think that's somewhat fair. I tried to do a little bit of digging into Joe Flacco to see, like, okay, what can we expect from this guy, really, right? Looking at his stats in 2022, he only played 3 games. If you extrapolate that, now 3 games is a terribly small sample size, but guess what? Joe Flacco doesn't really have a large sample size until you have to go all the way back to 2017. That was the last time he played a full season. He played 3 games. 2021, he didn't really even play at all. 2020, he played 4 games. 2019, 8 games. 8 games. 2018, 9 games. 2017, that was the last time he played a full season, was 2017. That's 5 years ago. Now, he came in the middle of the season, so I guess it works out for him, right? He only has to play half the season. So if he has some kind of a longevity issue, this has kind of been within his range. So we'll see what happens. So in that regard, maybe we'll be okay. But I extrapolated his touchdown to interception ratio for 2022, which would be 25 touchdowns, 15 picks. Okay. 2020, he played 4 games. Extrapolating that, what he did then over the course of a year, 24 touchdowns, 12 picks. Doing the same thing in 2019, 12 touchdowns, 10 picks. 2018, 23 touchdowns, 12 picks. 2017, his last full season, 18 touchdowns, 13 picks. That doesn't exactly read as a superstar. I mean, we knew
Feels
that,
like
though.
The longer he's in, the more he comes down to earth.
Exactly. That's what I was going to hit on. When he's been playing in those short bursts, and then you extrapolate that over the course of the season, you're like, all right, 25 and 15. I mean, it's not great. There's a lot of picks, kind of, But like, I could live with that. You could do something with that. But when he starts playing longer periods, that touchdown ratio starts getting significantly worse, right? It was 25 and 15 at 3 games. 4 games was 24 to 12. Then at 8 games is 12-10. 9 games is 23-12, which is pretty good. But then a full season, 18 and 13. My expectation is, based off of that, then over the next few weeks, he's going to play a little bit worse, but it should actually be around here because the truth is this game was not like insanely good, right? It's not like he was 3 touchdowns, no picks, 300 yards or something like that. It was just a good game. So I think what he did in this game, we can expect to see in the future. He is a veteran guy, and there were things that we saw from him that we didn't see from other guys. We saw him actually reading defenses. We saw him actually anticipating throws, which I hadn't seen a Browns quarterback do since I don't even know when. But that was something we noted about Deshaun Watson, was that he usually waits for the guy to be open. He sits there, then he makes the throw. Joe Flacco in that game had multiple throws where the guy was still running his route. He throws the ball, and then when they're done the route, the ball's in their hands. And we saw that a few times with Joe Flacco making really tight completions because of his anticipation. So something like that brings a new element to the Browns offense. And, we'll see how that plays out. But I think he's going to come back down a little bit as teams adjust to him. But I think he's about a bridge quarterback level. I think that's what we can expect from basically when I was like really digging into the data, digging into his numbers. I think we can expect bridge level quarterback play. With a defense that's elite and a bridge quarterback, you can go to a championship game. So I have very similar expectations. I think the length that this team can go, I would say, is probably the championship game, maybe a Super Bowl if the defense is elite. Joe Flacco can, of course, get hot. His arm talent, as far as actual strength, like his body doesn't look like it's aging out of existence, right? Like Peyton Manning towards the end, it looked like he had nothing left in his arm. Joe Flacco still's got some strength in there. He can still sling it really far. He can still put some zip on it on those short balls. So that's not what's going to hold him back. It's going to be Joe Flacco and who he was his whole career. And he has had periods where he can go off a little bit. So we'll see. He could do that in the playoffs. My expectation is this team with the defense right could go to the championship game. And I think realistically, I think this team will still squeeze into the playoffs. I think it's going to be tighter than we like, but I think they will still squeeze in. Most likely will be a first round exit. But yeah, I do agree that I think where Joe Flacco can take this team, I think the AFC Championship game is where Joe Flacco can take this team. I think we can expect bridge level quarterback play.
Yeah, and we've seen him when he won with the Ravens, it was going on a run. Like if you look at his overall seasons, he really was never sitting there throwing for 5,000 yards. He was never throwing for 4,500. He wasn't doing anything so crazy.
He's done for 4,000 yards in his career once.
Yeah, like he's not crazy, but then in that Super Bowl run, he went nuts. He threw like 8 touchdowns, no picks. Like he went off on a great run. So he kind of has that in him, and that is the one advantage to having him as a bridge as opposed to your typical bridge. Is he is, in other words, having a bridge that was really good, or at least was good and played at a playoff team a whole lot in a lot of big situations, means you don't have to deal with somebody who's not used to those clutch situations and maybe folds. He is used to them, and he played well in them, so at least you feel like maybe he's not a superstar, but at least you can expect the same level of play in big moments and that he won't suddenly shy and fall apart. So that's an additional benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I mean that's really the point. Like the big advantage of him over DTR is even if DTR starts playing better, he's still a rookie. In a big moment, he could just fall apart. You know, Joe Flacco's not going to do that.
Well, we don't know.
To the best of our knowledge.
That pick. But I mean, yeah. Well, so
but there's reason to think he won't.
Yeah, there's reason to think he won't. So we'll see what happens with that. Let's look ahead to next week. So we're talking about, okay, we think we can expect bridge level quarterback play from Joe Flacco. What does that mean in actual play? Next week, playing the Jags, what do you expect?
It's gonna be rough. Jags are a good team. It feels like a couple of times when they've had to play really good teams, they've gotten punched and bad. There's been a surprise or two in there, but for the most part, they've been really good. And it feels like their team is going to give us problems. Etienne's a good running back. He can get gashes. He can get moving. He can get you yards. At the same time, you know, they've got Calvin Ridley out there receiving. They've got Christian Kirk, who's done really well for them. So they've got multiple options. They can go multiple routes. Trevor Lawrence is playing pretty well. Not as crazy this year ever, but he's good, and he can certainly hit you when it matters and when it counts. So it just feels like they can hit you from anywhere, and teams that can hit us from anywhere seem to give us problems. And so I'm a little nervous because it feels like they will be able to score. And even if defense plays better and they don't go off the top, they're definitely going to be able to score consistently. And they have a pretty good D too. Like not crazy, but they're good D. So it just feels like they're a good team that knows how to win. And they're going to come in there. They're not going to underestimate this team. They're going to expect Joe Flacco to play pretty well because they saw it last week. They're not going to be taken by surprise. So I do think they're going to win. Now, I've been wrong a few weeks in a row now, so we'll see. But with the Browns this week, I'm going to say it's a loss, and it's going to be 27-21.
Interesting. I'll get into what my score prediction is at the end of my little rant. But I actually think the Jags are a little overrated. When you dig into them, the record looks good. When you dig into them, they don't seem quite as good in my personal opinion. Okay, so first of all, so they're 12th ranked defense. As far as like points per game, 12th ranked defense, somewhat above average, pretty good defense. Offense is 10th, pretty good. So they got a pretty good offense, pretty good defense. Nothing elite in either end of the ball though. When you look into their wins, like who are they beating? Like let's look at this, the college style. A lot of controversy with college's way of looking at things, but we're not going to get into that. But let's look at the resume. Let's look at the Jags resume. Who did they beat? I'm not going to list off all the teams that they beat because most of them were under 500. They've only beaten 2 over 500 teams. Those 2 teams being the 7-5 Steelers and the 7-5 Texans. doesn't exactly scream elite team as far as like the Jags are concerned. Not great wins. The Steelers are, the Steelers. They're kind of a weird team. The Texans have a pretty good offense. There's something there, but they're not beating elite teams, is what I'm getting at. The Browns, we look at the Browns wins, who are at the top of their resume, wins against the 9-3 Ravens, a win against the 9-3 Niners. They have beaten the cream of the crop in the NFL. The Jags haven't done that. The Browns have that top-end potential where they could take out any team. The Jags is not something they've shown. Now, the Browns are not a cream of the crop team. So, we'll see. But I think that the defense will do well enough against them. And go ahead, what?
I'm sorry, but you've seen Niners minus Debo, though. Because with Debo, they're rolling everybody. They just decimated the Eagles. I mean, they made the Eagles look like a JV team. And then, as far as Ravens, Deshaun was playing really well, though. So you could argue, do we have that quarterback level play to make a play like that? Because the defense did not hold up as well in the Ravens game. So, I mean, I don't disagree, but at the same time, I'm saying a lot of our wins haven't felt like they necessarily hold up to today. Jaguars, like I was saying, it's not that they're world beaters, because when they play the really good teams, they have not come up. That's what I'm saying. Like, they've gotten punched in the mouth against the really, really, really good teams, but at the same time, it feels like everyone they should beat, they beat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is true. But yeah, like I said, I think I agree with what you're saying isn't wrong. I just think that I think the Browns as a team have shown an ability to do something like that, but the Browns aren't that team like as far as like the Jags go. Like the Jags haven't taken on a top end team, right? I think the defense is going to do well enough. I think that Joe Flacco, as a veteran quarterback, I think he's going to come in. I think he's going to play one of his better games of the season. I think the Browns are going to win this game 27-21. That's what I had. I had that written down. I did not go off of you. I had that written down amazing. Before the show. 27-21 Browns victory, with a slight caveat. If Denzel Ward plays, 27-17. I think that one of those would be a field goal instead of being a touchdown.
So I was going to say, if they want to win, either Ward's going to come back or MJ Emerson better shape up quick, because they have a couple good receivers who are quick. So he can't be that. What happened Sunday with Puka Nacua? If he doesn't play a lot better, that's going to happen again. Because Christian Kirk can do that to you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to be tight, though. Obviously, both of us had it being a one-score game. You had the Browns losing. I had the Browns winning. So I'm actually a real Browns fan. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's going to wrap up our episode for this week. Thank you for listening to the Brownie Points podcast. Please give us a follow on Twitter. We do a lot of polls there. It's a great way for us to interact. You can also follow us on TikTok. All of them are at Brownie Points 99, I think. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.